life, right? You know what I'm saying? I'm sure that not having her around affected me in the ways with the women, you know what I'm saying? With me not trusting women and all that. But we live and we grow and we able to learn how to deal with things.
A little black book, just a really quick one. I think this is a really powerful video. Stevie J really opened himself up, spoke about his background, and I think this is a really great way to talk about attachment styles, because what Stevie J was explaining, and I'll play more of the clip for you in a few minutes, he explained that he grew up in a household where his mother actually abandoned him. Finally we get the answers as to why he mistreated all those women in the times we saw him on Love and Hip Hop, why he couldn't make it work with Faith Evans and Jocelyn and Mimi, and why it always became so destructive. He has abandonment issues, right? And he will never trust a woman, because the first one that he was supposed to love, the first one he was supposed to care about, abandoned him. Now, of course, he was only 8 months old, so he'd have never seen it physically happen. But the fact that she wasn't there, he would have felt her presence not being there. The fact that he reconnected with her at 40 years old, and only because Jocelyn pulled him up to a place where his mama was the only reason why he actually reconnected. And then for him to dismiss the feelings that he would have had by saying, I never really asked where she was. I never wanted to check where she was. And I'm like, well, I definitely hear that, but there's clearly some subconscious behaviors that are erecting itself as a conscious behavior in the way that you treat a woman. So we're going to break down this video, and we're also going to bring in the idea of attachment styles, because there was two things that were presented here. I definitely feel like he's an avoidant, and if you don't know anything about attachment styles, this was something done by John Bowlby. He's a British practitioner of psychology. And he came up with the idea of attachment styles, where the young child, how do they attach with the caregiver? They would let the caregiver leave the room and come back, and they would notice how the child would interact with the parent. Well, with avoidant children, the way they reacted was almost indifferent. They made it seem as if they were unfazed. But the reality of the situation is, when they got into adult relationships, they quite literally were phased. They were dealing with their anxiety, which is where all attachment styles that are insecure come from. The way that they dealt with anxiety was to actually avoid it, stop it having a hold on them, and suppressing their emotions. Does it sound familiar? Yeah, because Stevie J is the exact same way. And I'm going to play a few clips for you so you can actually really understand what I'm talking about. And I think this is a great way to also model yourself. You may not see yourself necessarily in Stevie J playing the field and playing all these women, but you will be able to understand exactly how he got here and how you can make sure that you also don't allow your pain to drag you into dry places. Now, let's get into the video. But before we do, make sure you guys like, share, subscribe, click on that bell button for notifications of the uploads. And we're going to get deep with this one.
Little black book, you know what time it is. Time it is. Time it is. Time it is.
Buffalo and Buff State, and then moved to Buffalo.
Well, you were raised by your dad, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Not by your mom, which is the more usual situation.
Yeah, my dad raised me, you know what I'm saying? And
Now, I don't know if you noticed when he asked him the question, Stevie J, actually, his face actually began to change. Like, he actually started to glow up. He got excited when they mentioned about his father, and his body language shifted. He became more upright, right? And I noticed that was obviously a sign that his father was very important in his life. Why? Because his father took care of him. In fact, there were 6 of them. And so we're going to hear a little bit more, because he actually explains where he felt in the totem pole when it comes to the order of the kids in the situation.
took care of me and my siblings. It was 6 of us, twin sisters. I was the youngest. He had us when I was 8 months. He took us 8 months.
So at 8 months, his mother had actually left him, and there were 6 kids. Now I can't let the video play long. I know if you're probably wondering why I can't. It's because I don't want no copyright. And the reality of the situation is, being the youngest, he wouldn't have physically witnessed his mother necessarily leaving. He might not even remember it. So he's going to be able to really suppress it down and put it as it doesn't really matter. But the reality of the situation is, it does. Right? For many children who grew up in households with a single parent, that is going to affect you. Now, you may not see it straight away, but it shows in the way that you attach in relationships. So I want to go back to avoidant attachments, right? This is often seen in individuals who are emotionally neglected. His father could have done something, of course, but the fact that his mother wasn't there, the fact that he had a mother wound, the fact that the mother was not able to supply the love and care and need that he would have needed as a young individual. Right? Grown up strong and probably very determined, and also very, very dismissive, because he had a father who's looking after 6. Yeah, it's going to be very difficult. And he's at the bottom? Yeah, it would have been very difficult. But he made it out the gutter. So for him, he's thinking of it this way. I made it out. I made it successful. I've done X, Y, and Z. I've got so many achievements. I'm Stevie J. But whilst he may feel those things, he must also understand that people who have an avoidant attachment, especially those who are fearful avoidant, but we can talk about dismissive too, are actually very highly career driven. Why? Because they're replacing the wound with achievements. If I can achieve this, then this will make me feel the love that maybe I'll make me feel the hole that I'm maybe missing at this particular moment, right? I can focus my career because that's something I can achieve and that's something I can actually control. And so avoidance will tend to suppress their emotions because it is very painful to unpack what they never had. In fact, more than likely, they actually didn't get time to actually really process their emotions. And so what are emotions? I didn't do them. They weren't part of my life. They weren't part of my routine. But what I did learn is to be independent. What I did learn is to avoid intimacy. What I did learn is to be strong. What I did learn is that no one else is coming to save you, right? And so I have to take care of me, which breeds this hyper independence and starts to breed this behavior where it's only about you, right? His mother was never there, so he didn't learn quintessentially some of those traits that we need to keep us balanced. But let's listen a bit more.
It was me, my brother, a year older than me, my other brother Keith, who had the problems with his legs, right? And then twin sisters.
Now, I want this to be really important. Notice that he mentioned about his brother who had some issues with his leg. Now, this is also going to play a major role in your attachment style too, and also the way that you deal with situations. For anybody who's got a family member who's disabled, you know exactly what this feels like, right? Where you know that you don't want to feel, you feel guilty trying to put yourself first in a family where somebody has a disability. And so actually what you start to do is your voice begins to go quieter. You start to put your knees on a back burner and you start to put that sibling above you or before you because you don't want to feel like a bad person putting your knees ahead of somebody who you believe's got a disability. And I say believe, they have got a disability, right? And so what ends up happening is people pleasing tendencies, manipulative tendencies of passive aggressive tendencies happen. We look and seek to get our needs met in a very manipulative way, meaning we struggle to voice how we have what we need because we never did it in our family, we never did it with our parent. And so what happens in relationships is we become manipulative and we take our needs. So let's say, for instance, I need a hug, right? I might use sex as the way to get the hug when I really needed it was a physical intimacy, right, rather than sexual. But I'll use sexual to get the physical, right? You hurt me, and instead of actually me voicing out that you hurt me, I become vindictive. Maybe I don't tell you to F off, maybe I don't shout at you, but I find a way that's passive aggressive to get you in the wrong and for you to say sorry. That's gaslighting. Yes, Stevie did some of those things, right? And we saw that on Love and Hip Hop. So some of these tendencies that we saw that are very maladaptive and very destructive in his adulthood, they're actually born in the dark, as somebody would say, Bane in Batman. But let's listen a bit more because he actually explains a lot more because they explain about his mother and where his mother actually was. And I think this is where it's also intriguing.
I mean, I never even got to school. I never even asked. You know what I'm saying? It's like, gotta live life, right? You know what I'm saying? I'm sure that not having her around affected me in the ways with.
So as we heard from the very first clip, he goes to lead on to talk about his mother. And actually what he says is, I never had the scope and I never asked. Now, can you imagine being 8 months and then growing up and getting older and not wondering where your mother is? Now, I've heard it from a very few people that said, like, you know what? They just had so much love from their parent, single parent. They never thought to ask where their parent is. So I can believe that does actually happen. But the fact that he recognizes that it affected his dating tells me that he probably would have recognized this as a young individual. He probably would have asked, where is mum? Why would he not ask if he's in a neighborhood where other people had their mums? And he said his dad never spoke wicked on his mum. He knew his mum was alive, then surely he would have at least had some questions in his mind. He may not have asked his father, or maybe he did and didn't ask again, but he would have had those questions. And it would have been that moment that he would have sparked the idea that women can't be trusted. And I think this is really important, right? This is really important because when we're discussing things around attachment, we've got to discuss the origin points, right? And so the mother wound here is the referring to the psychological, sometimes physical damage inflicted by a mother who's unable to meet the needs of a child, right? The emotional needs. And in this case, the mother had abandoned him, right? And so leaving him at such a young age, he knows it's affected him in his relationships, right? But his avoidance of even asking questions tells us how he deals with things. He pushes it aside. It's too emotional, he pushes it aside. And if you know anything about avoidance, which is there are dismissive and there is fearful avoidance, dismissive individuals suppress their emotions. They will tell you they don't have any needs, but they have plenty of needs. And when you trip the wire and you cross their boundary, they will let you know that you crossed their boundary. Right? Because they start avoiding you. They start distancing themselves. They start doing tactics that create distance in the relationship between you and them emotionally. Right? And then they'll start gaslighting you for saying, why do you mean I'm just taking space? Because they haven't realized that they're emotionally hurt. And instead of actually being vulnerable and sharing what actually they're feeling, they are going to take what they need. Yes, dismissive avoidance are takers. But I think there's another aspect to this as well. Right? Because we can talk about the other avoidancy, which is fearful avoidance. Fearful avoidance tend to be very career driven too, but they often have the hot and the cold. The way they deal with anxiety is sometimes they pull in, sometimes they push away, right? Actually, that makes for a very good player and a very good womanizer, because that hot and cold keeps a woman on a string. And for those of the women who are traumatized and hurt, remember, I think Mimi also grew up with her father. So it's funny and interesting that they actually came together for so long. Well, I'm sure that obviously, depending on what attachments they came with, this would have helped the toxic cycle that they actually found themselves in a relationship. Both afraid of being abandoned and staying in a relationship much longer than they actually needed to. Trust and emotional walls are very difficult, right? He's admitted to trust issues, and this is likely linked to the inconsistent care of his mother, right? And I say inconsistent, the lack of it. And so when a child's primary attachment figure is absent or inconsistent, they grow up doubting the reliability of others. He doubted Mimi, he doubted Jocelyn, he even doubted Faith Evans. And that's why he now wants to remain single and says, I'm gonna, focus on me and not focus on women, right? Now, I want to show you a bit of his dismissiveness, because this was also a part of what I felt was happening for him. Listen to this.
We live and we grow, and we able to learn how to deal with things and put it behind us. And that's the problem with the world today, is like a lot of.
Now, what's really interesting is that he puts this on the world. The world doesn't know how to put problems behind them. Wow, that's such a classic dismissive response, where they say that everything's cool, I had to make it through, it is what it is. Right? He actually says that a little bit alone. He says it is what it is. And is what it is the classic line of a dismissive avoidant. They're literally telling you, I had to do what I had to do. It is what it is. No one's going to cry for me, Argentina. I got to get on with life. And then here he goes on and tells us something really interesting. He looks at the world, because you see, one thing about dismissive avoidant is they have a high esteem of themselves, but a low esteem of others. And that's the issue. They don't trust other people, but they have to trust themselves highly, which is where the hyper independence comes from. I can only trust me. I can't trust the world. And so what he might see out in the world is people cry too easily. They get too emotional too easy. They break down too easy. Every day is trauma. Every day is this. But as for me, you saw how I made it out of the mud. People don't deal with their issues. Stevie, have you dealt with yours? Because as far as I'm concerned, I think you were still cheating with Faith Evans. Allegedly. Okay? Allegedly. Right? So that dismissiveness of his own, not even realizing this, okay? Now, he met his mother at 40, officially met her face to face. But he admits never having really a deep connection and deep conversation with her. And you know that this mother conversation makes him uncomfortable. That's why I know he hasn't really dealt with it. Okay? Of course, you can still be triggered, but it's the way he responded in his body language that made me realize.
Really met your mom.
Yeah, I sat down with her. You know what I'm saying?
Well, why would a mother leave?
Just here is literally when he chews his mouth, hearing about Vlad's question about his mother. And in that space, what's really intriguing, sorry, I just realized I got something going on. In that space, what's really intriguing is how his mouth twitches at the question. It's uncomfortable. I don't think he likes talking about it, right? Because he's put it aside. He thinks he's healed. He thinks he's done. He thinks he's finished. No. Putting it aside doesn't mean you're finished. Putting it aside does not mean that you've done what you need to do. It only means that you have suppressed it and repressed it. And the problem with suppression and repression is that if you don't deal with it, you will have to address it. It will eventually it will address you, and then it will undress you. Okay, but you know that was a bar. If you suppress it, repress it, just know if you don't address it, it will undress you. Ooh, Yeah, there's a lot of dresses in there. So that's also another important aspect when it comes to Stevie J's situation, right? So this avoidance of vulnerability, this is what avoidance are scared of. They're afraid of vulnerability, and because their whole life, them being vulnerable did not support their lifestyle, did not support them going forward, did not help them, and so being in a place of lack of vulnerability is normal for him. That's the state of being surface. Right? And it's funny because he made a comment, and I wish I could have found it. I didn't write down a note for it. He made a comment about how a therapist would have to take in all that he has gone through. He said he has been to therapy, but they would have to take in all that he was gone through. And I said, I wonder what kind of therapy he has done. Have they just been validating his emotions, which is probably the first part of the therapy that he might need. But in terms of challenging some of the thought processes, getting him to think about how he shows up, right? And the fact that he uses external focuses as a way of guarding himself from emotional pain. He mentions this later on about how he's only focused on his family and his music, and that's what he's going to focus on, right? And that can sometimes be the distraction from actually dealing with your emotional pain and dealing with the fact you have a lack of emotional safety. And so we go on to this point of dealing with the mistreatment of women. That fear of vulnerability will cause you to act out in relationships. The moment it has to get to a place of being vulnerable is the moment you're going to wild out. It is one of the reasons why Stevie probably sabotaged these relationships. You get too close, you get too deep, you get too loving, you get too caring. He go and sabotage it by sleeping with someone else, getting with somebody else. Because really and truly, the core crux of it is, I actually don't believe that I'm good enough. Right? There's a deeper wound here of not just that, but the fear of being abandoned, and which is abandonment is also one of the core wounds that's attached to anxiousness. That's why I said that he may be an avoidant, but he may be fearful avoidant rather than dismissive. I see the dismissive side of him, and the fearful avoidant can go on the spectrum of dismissiveness to anxiousness. But the fact that the fact that obviously the abandonment is the core wound is often a point of aspect of anxiousness. But if he's got avoidant with the anxiousness, that is fearful avoidant. And so in that space, when it comes to fearful avoidant, they are hot and cold lovers. They're coquettes in the art of seduction. And what that means is people that are drawn to them love the up and the downs that they create. And he has birthed his idea and probably his image and realized that relationships are fun when they're up and down, but they won't have the longevity. I'll stay away far enough until they miss me and then come back. Right? So he'll create a push and pull effect all in time. And so the womanizing that he's doing, the self-sabotaging he's doing, is maybe a grab for power and control. Right? The emotional withdrawals that he does, and then suddenly love bombing you all over again. These are real issues that he's actually suffering with. And if you're somebody who's sitting here right now, you're probably saying you may be a little bit far from Stevie J, but I want you to understand that actually these traits are in you if you are a dismissive or a fearful avoidant. You carry the same traits. They don't play out the same way, but you carry the same wounds, which is a fear of abandonment. So Stevie J's issues with trust, commitment, and mistreatment of women are deeply connected to the unsolved pain from his abandonment of his mother. And his attachment style, likely avoidant, probably even fearful avoidant, disorganized, and his inability to connect with his mother explain why he may struggle to have healthy relationships. And to also trust women as well in the future, right? To heal that mother wound as well, right? So Stevie would need to confront his abandonment issues to rebuild the trust with other women. And only then can he actually begin to heal. Now, if you've ever struggled with trust, emotional walls, relationship patterns, being hot and cold, not knowing what emotions you have, being dismissive or suppressive of your emotions, you find out that, in relationships it's not going too well. For some reason, you just can't make it work. The dating pool's got piss in it, as they would say, right? If these are the things that you're going through right now, then the next step of action is to literally sign up for my coaching. Because this is what we deal with. We deal with people on this on a regular basis. Now, I've opened up my practice slightly. I haven't opened it all the full way. There is some places that I've opened up, which I've left slightly open for those of you who cannot afford the full price of the coaching. Because I really want to help people, right? So I've only got a few spots for that. I still want to keep some of those spots open for those of you who cannot afford the full coaching price. There's a few spots open, but there's only a few, and I'll only do a maximum of 3 sessions. And the reason why is because I want to be able to make sure that I maximize my time, maximize your time, but also as well financial resources. I'm just gonna be honest with you. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I need to eat. But there is also my other side of things, where my full coaching spaces. They're open, they're ready to go, and that's underneath the queue jump as well, right? So I want you to use those spaces because I get booked up real quick. So now I've opened it, it gets booked up real quick, and I want to be help as many people as we can going forward. Okay, so I implore you to explore, heal, grow, and transform. We don't need to be here in 2025 because we said we're going to do bigger and better things. Well, I appreciate you guys. Stay locked, stay loaded. We're going to see you again very, very soon for another one of these enthralling conversations. Ta-ra, ta-ra.